The Redemption Inquiry by Michael Diamond. Part 1, Ill Winds. Chapter 2, Chasing the Dragon. The author's skinny on the modern era by way of his own particulars, the stories of his pater and grandpater. And what's pain got to do with it? Humanity's attempt to dodge the pain bullet with dope and technology. It's slavery down to the ground. Their dirty secret? He's looking back from redemption. The stoning of America comes after a long, slow wind-up. I am a 21st century psychiatrist, a healer of souls, and a purveyor of potions. It's personal, how I've come to tell you this story. I am also an observant Jew, something of an anachronism in our time, but I am deliberate about it. It organizes my thoughts in ways strange and beautiful. I come from a lineage that goes back on my father's side to the steppes of the Ukraine, the banks of the Dniester River. It is to that lineage that I turn in this true saga of Morpheus and Technos. The pursuit of dreams liberating the mind from the yoke of materiality, and the impulse to craft widgets out of stuff. Creation writ small. That's the gist of the story I'd like to lay out for you. I admit it. I've got an axe to grind in this whole sorry saga of humanity's dissolution and redemption. You'll see. But it's happening everywhere, all the time, to all of us. Evolution, devolution, revolution, absolution. Take me. My grandfather, Pop-Up Joe, was born in a shtetl, a primitive Jewish village in the Pale of Settlement, behind an invisible curtain that protected his community from the perils of the Enlightenment, from assimilation, from loss of identity. As a young teenager, inspired by peripatetic Bolsheviks and the bright lights of Odessa, he tore through that curtain to become a modern man. He came to America. He was the original steampunk dude, master of the world of machines. Pop Joe's son, my father, was born the privileged only son of a middle-class, non-observant Jewish family in Philadelphia, 1925. He attended the University of Pennsylvania, outstripped his father's technical education, became a pharmaceutical chemist. My father's father never understood my father's world, the world of molecules. I grew up the oldest of three, the only son of an atheist father in a household of nominally Reformed Jews in an upper-middle-class suburb of Philadelphia. I wandered between colleges, smoked pot, traced a meandering path to medical school and onward to residency in psychiatry. Mine is the world of ideas and of spirit. My father, never having understood my lifelong fascination with spirit, worried that I might believe in a, quote, a guy with a white beard on a throne, unquote. Not to worry, Dad. The three of us, grandfather, father, and son, three different paradigms to collar the cosmos, mechanical, molecular, and spiritual. I like to imagine the evolution of the world in the gaze from the future redemption. The birth of the Messiah occurs on Wednesday, April 9th, 2121. That's the last time in human history when Passover, the recurring dream of redemption from bondage, intersects with the 28-year cycle of the blessing of the sun. In the days of the temple, the Levites, beadles to the priests, raised their hands to the sky to empower the sun to burn away through the firmament, the technology for harnessing the magic of creation. Morpheus and Technos. The two cosmic colliders crossed paths only twice since their medieval crossing in 1309. Once in 1925, the year of my father's birth, and the other in 2009, a year of evil augury. Rough bookends in the telling of this first tale, the setup for the eventual demise of humanity as we know it. 1925. The year Dad is born in Philadelphia. They revised the International Opium Convention, the political answer to a worldwide opiate epidemic already running full tilt, an epidemic fueled by 2 centuries of Western gunboat diplomacy. It's always about distribution. Who controls access to relief from pain, the ticket to virtual paradise, to La La Land? Who parcels out Shangri-La to the lotus eaters? The convention begets the first ever international drug control body, the Permanent Central Opium Board. Those boys use an honest-to-God statistical control system, an official organ of the League of Nations, by gum. The League bans heroin that year. The U.S. and Egypt can't put the kibosh on hashish because India and its pals say no go. The U.S. has no second thoughts about banning alcohol. That year, Prohibition creates a field day in Philadelphia for speakeasies and other purveyors of illegal hooch, the poor man's Morpheus. In Chicago, Alphonse Al Gabriel Capone claws his way to the top of a criminal syndicate that runs an empire of illegal breweries and a transportation network that spans the U.S. and Canada. A shadow league of cops and politicians deep in his pocket. The wrangling of Morpheus is big business. In the embattled national atmosphere and moral chaos of the Prohibition era, one man stands out in Philadelphia's history, General Smedley D. Butler. Pop Joe told me about the general when I was a kid. Butler is tapped by Cal Coolidge and the mayor of Philly for a detail out of the Marine Corps and into the role of Philadelphia's Director of Public Safety. His job? Clean up Philadelphia. It all ends abruptly that fateful year, 1925. What must it have been like to be a tool of the great capitalist beast that subdued the world and all the peoples in it, Joseph to Coolidge's Pharaoh? Let me give you the 411 on the most decorated general in Marine Corps history. 6 years post-Philly, the Fighting Quaker retires altogether and hits the speaking trail. 3 years after he hits the road, he's a goddamn whistleblower testifying before the House of Representatives Special Committee on Un-American Activities. Seems a cabal of Wall Street investment types, J.P. Morgan moneymen, and even old Prescott Bush are hatching a plot to take over the government from the newly elected FDR. Imagine it, fat cats funding an insurrection against their own government. Plus ça change. Butler was a hero to the thousands of disgruntled World War veterans who camped out in the bonus march, so-called on account of President Hoover's refusal to hand over their service bonuses. Butler stood solid with the soldiers on the banks of the Anacostia River, while Douglas MacArthur and George Patton ran roughshod over them, over Dwight D. Eisenhower's objections. Butler even voted for FDR in spite of being a die-hard Republican. The quote-unquote business plot conspirators are sorely mistaken when they think Butler might be recruited to lead 500,000 disaffected vets in a coup against the president. Butler tells a congressional committee that he was groomed to assume near absolute power as the newly created Secretary of General Affairs. Roosevelt would be a figurehead, an honest-to-God fascist dictatorship at a time when much of the rest of the world is pitching itself headlong into the arms of a bevy of totalitarian dictators. Humanity misses the mark in 1925, not a whiff of the redemption in the air. When Butler spills the beans, he doesn't count on the fact that the business cronies put in the fix with the government boys in the newspapers. They shut him down. The congressional record stands. Probably why he goes public a couple of years later with his famous anti-war pamphlet, War is a Racket. He blows the whistle on the latest avatar of Technos, the military-industrial complex, Eisenhower's lingo for his future farewell in 1961. Butler ruefully admits he was a bigger racketeer than Al Capone, quote-unquote, a gangster for capitalism, on 3 continents, propping up banana republics around the globe, all on Uncle Sam's dime. What's good for the company is good for the country, and war is always good for business. War and intoxicants, twin horsemen of the apocalypse. But back in Philly in 1925, the fighting Quaker kicks down doors and takes names. Smedley D. Butler takes unfettered aim at speakeasies, bootlegging, prostitution, gambling, and police corruption. His success is mixed with complaints of civil rights violations and other irregularities. In the end, Butler resigns under pressure. On his way out the door, he says to anyone who cares to listen, quote, "Cleaning up Philadelphia was worse than any battle I was ever in," unquote. I happened to catch the "war is a racket" speech on my car radio while driving through the D.C. suburbs just before the turn of the 21st century. I am astounded. I can't believe it's the same guy whose name Pop Joe dropped when I was a kid. At the time, all I knew was one of Pop's particularly absurd stories about General Smedley D. Butler. Sounded like a W.C. Fields character. Pop-Up Joe was a fledgling father the last year of Butler's tenure in Philly. Pop told me a knee-slapper in his heavily Yiddish-inflected English about the general. Cars were a new thing in Philadelphia, and there was starting to be a problem with traffic congestion. So they brought in this big general, Smedley D. Butler. Pop Joe made sure to emphasize the D to somehow amp up the comedy. The big idea was to put an enormous light on top of William Penn on the City Hall. When it was red, the cars would tear like hell down Broad Street. When it was green, they tear like hell down Market Street. Pop's comic delivery crescendos, along with his rolled R's and the hacking k sound of his pronunciation of the H in hell, the sound of an alta-cocker clearing a clot of mucus from his throat. Joe laughs. Of course it didn't work. His hands flung out in mock exasperation. Now I can see it. The city's first drug czar, the original Keystone Cop. Technos down in flames. The man in the street came to see him as a laughingstock. Perhaps the work of a crooked press. Who knows? This is your government on drugs. War and hooch. The whole sad pas de booze. Sic semper inebriatus. Moshiach! Cries Malka Diamond, née Belsky, as they hoist her bloody baby boy bawling from the womb on April 12, 1925. Messiah in the Mamelushon, the mother tongue, Yiddish. She is Grandma Molly to me. It's the same thing she croaks 55 years later as I enter the room of her nursing home in Bryn Mawr, PA. Alone and dying of lung cancer, she never smoked a cigarette in her life. My father witnessed her death by asphyxiation, horror. I could not read his emotion at the telling of it. My grandfather was sure the doctors were trying to off his beloved Malka with their morphine, so he made them stop. Morphine, the blessing of its dream withheld. Dad was born on Easter Sunday, the 4th day of Passover. 4 days after the eve of Passover had made that rare intersection with Birkat HaChama, the blessing of the warm one, the sun. An auspicious time for Moshiach, if ever there was. The holy Ofstrafster Rebbe, back in the old country, preached with millenarian ardor precisely that. It didn't happen. "We went crazy over your father," Pop Joe confided in me some years later. "We would stare into his diaper so you would think we were searching for jewels." He could laugh at their obsession, but the messianic fervor was just below the surface. My dear departed, newly reimagined post-redemption dad. What a painful lifetime that was for you. It's good to see the transdimensional map of your face smiling wistfully back on all that Narishkeit nonsense, now that we're all hanging out in the post-truth era. Foolishness. Trace the arc, humanity's flight from pain over the course of centuries, the fractal geometry of suffering. Pain, a guiding principle from Paleolithic times through the rise and fall of ancient and modern empires. Pain was my father's specialty, his grand passion, for good reason. I can still see Pop-Up Joe, barely 5 feet and a piece of fire, bestriding the narrow strand in Ocean City, New Jersey. He is a stumpy Russian Jewish colossus, fedora hat, sleeveless tee, and suit pants. With little prompting, Pop launches into the heroic saga of saving his dying son's life. My father sat out the big one in chemical engineering school at the U of P. But the war at home is pretty savage. To escape the pressures of his hyped-up academic schedule and the intrusions of his well-meaning parents, my father runs around with a bunch of zoot-suited buddies, scaring up as much trouble as could be had by a handful of yids in the city of brotherly love, until he starts to bleed out. It is his senior year at U of P. By then, most of his pals have either signed up or been conscripted into Uncle Sam's army. The way I see it, his rage to live, to be out from under his parents' thumb, got turned inward, rotted his guts from the inside. They didn't know much about ulcerative colitis back then. So my grandfather pays whatever money he has to a battalion of specialists to take my father apart, piece by necrotic piece. Osiris dismembered and tossed in the Nile Delta by his half-brother Seth. Sparagmos, split up so the predator can't get all of you at once. The shocked mind also stores itself in little pieces that may or may not be redeemed by a future act of remembering. On the beach, Pop-Up Joe shakes a handful of misshapen and grease-stained fingers at the sky. They said he would die if I didn't get him the new wonder drug, streptomycin, only for the GIs. But Joe Diamond doesn't take no for an answer. There were these guys I heard of, up in Boston. You could get anything for a price. A price! We were talking about my boy. Dad lies on his beach chaise, reading the Wall Street Journal, pale and unmoved. I got in my car and drove all the way to Boston, paid the men what they wanted, and took the streptomycin back to Dr. Bacchus at the Graduate Hospital. Tears rolling down his cheeks, Pop Joe bellows with clenched fists, trembling. He said it saved Julius's life. Bacchus, draped in leopard skins, surrounded by scantily clad ICU nurses, resurrects my dying father. Pop Joe cranks up his steampunk Macher mojo to pay for all the fancy doctoring and surgeries. Hawthorne, the surgeon, was a big doctor, opines my grandfather. Had one of those fancy guyish, meaning Gentile and therefore top of the line, places out on the main line. One of those long driveways that goes from the street all the way up. He wanted me to make a light for him. A light for a life. Seemed like a fair deal. After all, my grandfather is the man who electrified Philadelphia. A one-man industrial revolution, technos incarnate. He moved there straight from the classrooms of Cooper Union in the Big Apple to the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. Once he hits the streets of Philly, it's only a matter of time before he becomes a real macher, a fixer of every kind of mechanical contraption. He's also a millwright, a practitioner of the arcane technology that keeps an army of Rube Goldberg apparati humming along, networks of belts and pulleys and flywheels that power the works in the factories of the roaring 20s. In Philly, he starts with ships, a kind of Yiddish Ben Franklin. The other dock workers are amazed at the pile of a dozen sandwiches this 5-foot-tall Yid pulls from his rucksack at lunch every day. Little Yankel, the original steampunk dude. Yankel and Malka weather the Great Depression on the income from properties he acquires while converting the housing stock of the city from gas to electric. This was the infancy of the grid, as we call it now. Same year, 1925, the British government commissions Lord Weir, a Glaswegian industrialist, to solve the problem of the piecemeal electrical supply system. Lord Bill teams up with Charlie Mertz, the man who turned horse-drawn trams into electric trains, and presto, the Electricity Act of 1926. Britain is on its way to a national gridiron, the original term of art, the seedbed of the entire electronic universe yet to come. The whole shebang takes some fancy off-the-books work of the nighttime engineers to hook up all the regional systems into one big one, an army of steampunk dudes like my grandfather, technos chugging full tilt. The U.S. and the rest of Europe are soon to follow suit. By the 21st century, we are all waiting for the grid to crash. Everywhere that mankind travels, by plane or train or ox cart, it carries with it its pain and its remedies, the profusion and the dying back, the dream of liberation and the technology that both blesses and curses it. The final Dr. Bacchus story, courtesy of Yankel the electrician, the millwright, the master of the machine. This one also told while Pop Joe holds court on the beach. I came to visit your father one afternoon in the hospital and found him lying in a pool of blood. My father splashed down, after ascending the fiery heights of chemical engineering school, onto a cot in a ward at the graduate hospital, nary a ripple in the pond, as friends, classmates, and sweetheart quietly disappeared into the silence of a protracted series of hospitalizations and a 5-year convalescence. My grandfather paces the beach and pounds his fist into his palm. I ran to the head of the bed to see if he was breathing. He whispered to me, "Let me go, Pop." My father, for his part, would have been just as happy to drift off into a morphine sulfate-induced la-la land, never to return. He told me so. But then I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. No, shouts Pop Joe. I was not going to let my son die. I got them to call the doctor right away. You should have seen them all running around every which way and taking orders. It was under Dr. Bacchus's direct instructions they hung your father upside down and poured blood right into his legs. He did not die that day. Tearful grandfather, mute father. For years I imagined the god Bacchus had dangled my father upside down from a grapevine and bathed him in life-giving wine. In reality, they put my father in Trendelenburg and did a Venus cut-down. Less dramatic than a Bacchic epiphany, but it worked. My father's stigmata. The doctor, an avatar of holy technos, was a dealer in time. Morphine saved my life, my father told me flatly. For 5 years it kept me out of pain, but I knew I'd eventually have to go through pharmacologic withdrawal. My father describes the launching of his career as a pharmaceutical chemist. Rage was the only thing that pushed me out of my sickbed. Your grandmother would have hung over me the rest of my life. Years later, when we debrided my grandparents' empty apartment, Dad finds an entry in his mother's diary from his years of illness. I fear we are losing our boy, she writes. He tosses the diary, the clothing, the furniture. The city of Philadelphia condemns Joe's 3 warehouses full of old shop machinery in various stages of disrepair. The mechanical paradigm gets the boot. My father continues his story. Arthritis in both of my hips. I was determined to walk, even if it was on 2 canes. I had to get out of that house. Bill Bruce gave me my break. I worked in his lab at Wallace while I was going for my Ph.D. at Temple. My life's dream? The secret to safe opioid analgesia. Heterocyclic compound seemed like the royal road. For my dissertation, I designed a synthesis for ethoheptazine. Hard to say what morphine really was for my father, or for anyone else that tasted of its intoxicating potency. Persephone's cursed pomegranate seed, or Osiris's redeeming golden phallus. Dad thought he'd found the Holy Grail. J.D.'s Ph.D. invention is dubbed Zactane. A match is arranged between Zactane and Miltown. Miltown, a.k.a. meprobamate, was the first blockbuster psychotropic in American history, named after a bucolic North Jersey suburb. In 1957, Milltown accounts for a whopping third of all prescriptions of any kind written in the U.S. The bloom, however, is off the rose. At a meeting of pharma wizards at the Barbizon Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, the skinny circulates that the bucolia-inducing wonder drug is merely a dangerous sedative, not the relaxant as advertised. The blind seer of psychedelia, Aldous Huxley, chief literatus in the Huxley scientific dynasty, camps out at the Barbizon as well. He prophesies to the chemical gurus that they are at the threshold of an era, an explosion of compounds, quote, capable of changing the quality of human consciousness, unquote. Compounds which, along with the rest of medicine's love affair with technology, transform the doctor-patient relationship from companion in healing to instrumentalist in an orchestra with no conductor other than market share. Death, the ultimate predator, evaded once more by a scattering into parts. Zactane and Milltown, joined in unholy matrimony by Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, beget Equagesic, the dark alchemy of market share and human suffering. It, too, is not the redemption devoutly to be wished. Equagesic was, however, Betty Ford's and Bruce Lee's future bête noire. The history of narcotics is both personal and collective. Yankel the electrician can never quite grasp how such tiny pills could do anything to alter the mechanical device he conceives as the human body, and therefore doesn't grasp the sea change at play. He and my father stand on opposite shores of a technos paradigm shift. Morphine, the dream married to the technology, is my chemist father's deadly muse. The first pure medicinal molecule isolated from a plant. Friedrich Serturner was the man for the job, circa 1803 to 1805. Named for Morpheus, god of dreams. Opium, mother of Morpheus, goes back even further, the oldest of psychedelic medicinals, elixir of the subcontinental poppy. Some speculate soma in the Rig Veda, the moonlight plant, opiate or hallucinogen. Joy plant, to the Bronze Age Sumerians, cultivated by the Egyptians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, traded by the Phoenicians and Minoans throughout the Mediterranean. The Persian and Islamic empires humped it to the Far East. Opium features prominently in the Aber's Papyrus and in Dioscorides, Galen, Avicenna, and Paracelsus. It dusts the halls of empire as well as Neolithic burial sites. Opium made surgery possible in the ancient world. Technos and Morpheus waltz hand in hand, spin crazily out of control with each turn of the millennia, lurching toward apocalypse. It isn't until the horrors of the American Civil War that opium yields its hegemony to morphine. The Gilded Age turns its lonely eyes from luxuries afforded by slaveholding to alternate realities produced by opium and morphine in the minds of wounded soldiers, middle-class women with, quote, female problems, and destitute gentry alike. The Chinese Opium Wars were the snarling hellhound beneath the glittering surface of the Gilded Age. Wars fought on the behest of the British East India Company, backed by the gunboats of Britannia. They forced the opium trade down the maw of a resistant Chinese empire that is desperately trying to control the growing rate of addiction among its citizens. But what's good for the balance of trade for the company is good for the crown. The Brits had already grabbed the subcontinental opium market and destroyed India's economy a century earlier. Collateral damage from the victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The company giveth, and the company taketh away. The very same company, by the way, whose tea leaves our colonial forefathers threw into Boston Harbor. Industrial strength pain control is at hand. Opium eating is a staple of Victorian London society parlors, even featured as the solution to a Lewis Carroll formal logic puzzle. Quote, if he wears white gloves, he is an opium eater. End quote. However, once opium becomes an international scourge, it's fashionable to pin it on the Chinese. We can almost laugh at the feigned ignorance of it all, looking back from the point of view of the redemption. The dealers in pain and intoxicants disingenuously point to their victims as the source of the problem rather than the fallout. Amnesia, operative principle in the dim halls of history. My father's parting psychoactive gift to the world is Quaalude, aka methaqualone, a plant-derived anti-malarial compound from India. I was a sullen young tween in the mid-60s, not yet savvy in the way of the psychonaut. Dad is driving me to school one typically dull morning when, apropos of nothing, he pimps me. Guess what the most popular drug on the streets is right now? I probably shrugged. Quaaludes, he says. I couldn't tell how my father felt about the repurposing of his invention. It wasn't until a few years later in high school that I got to see for myself the power of the subcontinental elixir. In the middle of symbolic logic, Drake Richardson, a tall, intelligent, waspy athlete not wearing white gloves, begins to gyre in his seat whilst emitting a continuous low moan. Mr. Savage, also the geometry teacher, possessed of the peculiar skill to trace large perfect circles on the chalkboard, adroitly escorts Drake to the school nurse's office. Another pal, Mark Silverberg, a tough no-nonsense wrestling team dropout, comes to school on a Monday with his face smashed up. Seems he kissed the sidewalk after a three-way tryst with Mulgan David and Ludes. They were dropping like flies. Ludes are alleged to be Bill Cosby's preferred date rape Mickey Finn. The government of South Africa deploys it in Project Coast under the direction of Dr. Wouter Basson. An armamentarium of psychoactive potions helps gain non-lethal control over anti-apartheid rioters. The entire drug cache disappears underground when the National Party gets the boot. The total quantity of methaqualone released into the ether estimated at 1 ton. Back in the USA, none of my crowd are hip enough for Studio 54 and its psychedelic delights, but Ludes are making the glam rock scene full force. Disco biscuits, hors d'oeuvres for the terminally cool. At a press conference on June 18, 1971, President Richard Nixon declares the war on drugs. We were deep into war those days, Vietnam and all. And what a sexy combo it is, war and narcotics. The next couple of decades sees a metastatic expansion of the distribution of heroin, the successor to morphine, in no small part thanks to the CIA's business partnerships with the Hmong tribesmen in Laos in the 1970s and with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Our own spooks midwife the growth and development of the world's two largest sources of opioid production, the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent. Rumor has it that Air America, the CIA's own, ships black tar opium in body bags from Vietnam to customers around the globe. But by 2009, the supply chain shifts. Mexican heroin production ramps up 600% from just 4 years earlier, and a spate of new synthetic opioids are on the launching pad. The twin tentacles of the opioid epidemic insinuate themselves among America's citizenry, snaking their way along the byways and thoroughfares of the country's decaying small towns and urban ghettos. On May 13, 2009, a month and 5 days after the blessing of the sun has once again slammed into the eve of Passover, President Obama officially announces the phrase, "war on drugs is defunct." An abject failure, the end of an era. The promise of redemption, hinted by the cosmic intersection of Passover and the blessing of the sun, comes and goes once again as it did in 1925. Power is no longer to be consolidated into the hands of fascist dictators, but rather into those of monster multinational corporations. The cartels are raking it in, and smaller narco-entrepreneurs are having a feeding frenzy. Citizens United, the deceptively named plaintiff in the eponymous Supreme Court case, is decided in Annis 2009. It opens up unrestricted access for billions of dollars of dark money to stream its way into the American electoral politics. Within the decade, the billion-dollar drug distribution companies flood every small town in America with a virtual tidal wave of prescription opiates, eagerly sucked up by an ever-hungrier black market. A cabal of former DEA turncoats, industry fat cats, and greasy palm politicos see to it that the flood of legal dope continues unabated. This is a direct result of the, quote, Ensuring Patient Access and Effective Drug Enforcement Act, unquote. That particular scam is sponsored by a scurrilous U.S. rep from Pennsylvania and cheered on by the billion-dollar pharma distribution company that bought and paid for him. It effectively takes the teeth out of DEA's attempt at enforcement against the distributors, a massive act of bad faith that somehow flies under the radar of the entire U.S. Congress. President Trump even has the audacity to float a nomination of the scammer to be the nation's drug czar. The nomination is withdrawn when the scam is made. The dank air of desperation deflates the ragged remnant of the enforcement community. Money, the nightmare accelerant. The runaway synthetic opiate train is just one sign that Aldous Huxley's prophecy has come true with a vengeance. I can only shake my head as I sit at my desk, prescription pad in hand, doling out a steady stream of psychopharmaceuticals to my suffering patients, the secrets of the mystic East reduced to nostrums in pill form. Our capacity as a species for going blotto, for drastically twisting psychic reality, for chasing the dragon around every corner of God's green earth, has never been so gargantuan. Looking backward from the redemption, the leap from chemical to cyber-based euphoria is the train wreck waiting to happen, the cyberdelic paradigm shift foretold by none other than Timothy Leary, the psychedelic leprechaun himself. Quote, "Turn on, boot up, jack in," unquote. The ultimate marriage of Morpheus and Technos. The 21st century's armies of cyber-addled teen bear witness to that eventuality. Back in 2009, the chemical boys are still working overtime. An explosion of bathtub synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones, whose sacred plant forms are known respectively in the Eastern Hemisphere as ganja and khat, pour onto the streets of Western Hemisphere cities as spice and bath salts. The first toxicity reports from poison control centers start rolling in. That year, governments around the globe scrambled to pass drug regs outlawing the handful of compounds they've been able to identify. But before the ink dries, the rave market saturates with the next batch of novel hallucinogens. It's too late, as ever it shall be. The cat is out of the bag. The dragon lives to smolder another day. The redemption, the salvific union of Morpheus and Technos, postponed.